April the 17th, 2023. Ravenwood County Juvenile Court. The gallery was packed with reporters, spectators, and community members who had come to witness something unthinkable. At the defense table sat an 11-year-old boy in an orange jumpsuit with a white undershirt visible at the collar. Caleb Morgan leaned back in his chair, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. For him, this was not justice. This was a performance. He believed the system would see a child, not a killer. The charge was juvenile reckless endangerment resulting in death, but the truth pointed to something far darker. His mother was dead, and he showed no grief, only inappropriate confidence. He performed confusion on cue, widening his eyes when cameras turned his way, slumping his shoulders when adults spoke to him. The courtroom was being misled. Every witness, every argument, was only a path toward one moment. Somewhere in the evidence files sat an audio recording, unheard by most, waiting. A smart home baby monitor had captured something extraordinary. When that recording played, everything would change. Judge Eleanor Hartwick presided, a woman who had seen performances before. When she finally spoke Caleb Morgan's name after the truth was revealed, the act would end. Childhood would no longer protect him. The courtroom smelled of old wood and floor polish. Caleb Morgan sat with his hands folded on the table, looking small in the adult-sized chair. His public defender, Marcus Webb, a weary man in his 50s, with thinning hair and a rumpled suit, leaned close and whispered something. Caleb nodded, but his eyes wandered to the gallery, searching for cameras. When he found one, his expression shifted. The faint smile disappeared, replaced by a look of childish vulnerability. It was practiced, deliberate, and entirely false. Judge Hartwick entered through the side door, her black robe sweeping behind her. Everyone rose. She was 62, with silver hair, pulled into a tight bun and eyes that missed nothing. She had presided over juvenile cases for 20 years and had seen every manipulation, every false tear, every coached response. As she settled into her chair, she studied the boy at the defense table. Something about his posture, the way he held his shoulders, struck her as wrong. Children accused of terrible things usually radiated fear or confusion. This one radiated calculation. The bailiff called the court to order. Prosecutor Linda Chen stood, a compact woman in her 40s with sharp features and an even sharper mind. She had spent 3 weeks preparing this case, and she knew it inside out. The evidence folders on her table were organized by color and date. She touched the blue folder lightly. That one contained the recording. Not yet. Everything had to build toward that moment. The state calls this arraignment to order in the matter of Caleb James Morgan, charged with juvenile reckless endangerment resulting in death, Judge Hartwick announced. Her voice was firm, carrying easily through the courtroom. How does the defendant plead? Marcus Webb stood, placing a hand on Caleb's shoulder. Not guilty, Your Honor. Caleb looked up at the judge with wide eyes, as if confused by the proceedings. It was a good performance. Judge Hartwick's expression did not change, but she noted the way his gaze flickered to the gallery before settling back on her. Calculating the audience. Linda Chen rose. Your Honor, the state requests the defendant be held pending trial. The nature of this case— He's 11 years old, Marcus Webb interrupted, his tone heavy with practiced outrage. This child has no prior record, no history of violence. He's traumatized by the loss of his mother. Holding him serves no purpose except to satisfy public outcry. Linda turned to face him. "His mother is dead, counselor. The circumstances of her death are inconsistent with the defendant's account. The evidence suggests a tragic accident," Marcus cut in. "A scared child who made a panicked call for help. Nothing more." Judge Hartwick raised a hand. "I've read the preliminary reports. Bail is denied. The defendant will remain in juvenile detention pending trial. We'll reconvene in 2 weeks for preliminary hearings." She struck her gavel once. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Caleb's mask slipped for just a fraction of a second. His jaw tightened, and his eyes flashed with something cold. Then the vulnerability returned, and he looked down at his hands as if fighting tears. Marcus squeezed his shoulder reassuringly. In the gallery, a woman in her 70s, Caleb's maternal grandmother, pressed a tissue to her eyes. She had raised questions about her grandson before, whispered concerns to her daughter about his coldness, his lack of empathy. Her daughter had dismissed them. Now, her daughter was dead. As the guards led Caleb out, he glanced back at the courtroom. His eyes found the nearest camera. He let his lower lip tremble. The performance continued even as the door closed behind him. Linda Chen gathered her files. Her assistant, a young law clerk named David Park, leaned close. "He's good," David whispered. "Too good." "He thinks he is," Linda replied. Her hand rested on the blue folder. "But he made one mistake. Just one. And it's going to end him." 2 weeks later, the courtroom filled again. The preliminary hearings began with testimony from the first responders. Paramedic James Rodriguez took the stand, a stocky man in his 30s with kind eyes that had seen too much tragedy. Linda Chen approached him with a yellow legal pad. "Mr. Rodriguez, please describe what you found when you arrived at the Morgan residence on March 23rd. James shifted in his seat. "We received a 911 call at approximately 3:15 in the afternoon. The caller, later identified as Caleb Morgan, reported that his mother had fallen down the stairs and was not breathing. We arrived at 3:22. The front door was unlocked. We entered and found the victim, Melissa Morgan, at the base of the basement stairs. She was unresponsive. No pulse." "What was the condition of the scene?" "The basement stairs are concrete, 13 steps. The victim was lying face down at the bottom. There was significant head trauma. Blood pooled around her head. We immediately began resuscitation efforts, but she had been deceased for some time. Body temperature and rigor suggested she had been dead at least 30 to 45 minutes. Linda paused, letting that timeline settle over the jury. "Where was Caleb Morgan when you arrived?" "He was in the living room, sitting on the couch. He was calm. He told us his mother had fallen and he had called for help." "How did he appear emotionally?" James hesitated. "He was very composed. No tears, no visible distress. When I asked if he was okay, he said yes. When I asked what happened, he repeated that she fell." "Did anything about his demeanor strike you as unusual?" Marcus Webb stood. "Objection. Calls for speculation. The witness is not a psychologist." "Sustained," Judge Hartwick said. "Rephrase, counselor." Linda nodded. "In your experience as a paramedic responding to family emergencies, how do children typically react when a parent is injured or deceased?" "They're usually hysterical, crying, screaming, trying to help. They don't understand what's happening. They're in shock." "And Caleb Morgan's reaction?" "He sat on the couch and watched us work. He asked once if his mom was going to be okay. When I told him we were doing everything we could, He nodded and went back to watching. Linda let the silence stretch. No further questions. Marcus Webb approached for cross-examination, his expression sympathetic. Mr. Rodriguez, you testified that children in shock behave in certain ways, but shock manifests differently in different people, correct? Yes, that's true. Some people freeze when traumatized. They become very still, very quiet. You've seen that before, haven't you? I have. So Caleb's calm demeanor could be explained by shock, couldn't it? James looked uncomfortable. It could. And you're not a psychologist, are you? You can't diagnose whether a child is in shock or not just by looking at them. No, I can't. Thank you. Marcus returned to his seat, satisfied. Caleb sat beside him, staring at his hands, the picture of a traumatized child. But in the gallery, Detective Raymond Harris watched with narrowed eyes. He had interviewed Caleb Morgan 3 times, and each time the boy's story had been identical, word for word, gesture for gesture. In 30 years of police work, Raymond had never seen a genuinely traumatized witness give identical statements. Memory was fluid, especially under stress. Details changed, expanded, contracted, but Caleb's account never varied. That was not shock. That was rehearsal. The next witness was Detective Harris himself. He took the stand with the bearing of a man who had testified hundreds of times. Linda Chen smiled at him, a brief professional acknowledgement, then began. Detective Harris, you were the lead investigator in this case. Please describe your initial assessment of the scene. Raymond pulled out a small notebook, though he barely needed it. I arrived at the Morgan residence at 4:30 on March 23rd. The victim had already been transported to the county morgue. I examined the basement stairs where the fall allegedly occurred. The stairs are concrete, enclosed by walls on both sides, with a metal handrail on the right side. There was blood spatter consistent with head trauma at the bottom. However, there were also impact marks higher up on the wall, approximately 7 steps from the top. What did those impact marks suggest to you? They suggested the victim struck the wall during the fall, possibly multiple times. I also noted that the victim's injuries, later confirmed by the medical examiner, were more severe than typically seen in simple falls. Did you interview the defendant? Yes, 3 times. First at the scene, briefly, then at the station with a social worker present, and finally 2 days later with his attorney present. Describe his demeanor during these interviews. Raymond leaned back. Calm. Extremely calm. He answered every question without hesitation. His story never changed. He said he was upstairs in his room playing video games. He heard a crash. He came downstairs and found his mother at the bottom of the basement stairs. He called 911. When I asked him specific questions, like what game he was playing or what time he started playing, he answered immediately. No pauses to think. No corrections. Why is that significant? Because memory doesn't work that way, especially for a child in a traumatic situation. People forget details, mix up timelines, remember new things later. Caleb's account was identical every time. Same words, same order, same details. Linda walked to the evidence table and picked up a DVD in a plastic sleeve. Your Honor, I'd like to enter State's Exhibit 3, video recording of the defendant's second interview. So entered, Judge Hartwick said. A screen descended from the ceiling. The lights dimmed. The video began. It showed a small interview room, beige walls, a table, 2 chairs. Caleb sat in one, looking even smaller than he did in court. Across from him sat Detective Harris and a female social worker, Patricia Delgado. The timestamp read March 25th, 10:30 in the morning. Caleb, can you tell me again what happened on the afternoon your mother died? Raymond's voice was gentle, non-threatening. Caleb looked at the camera, then back at Raymond. I was in my room playing Fortnite. I heard a loud crash. I went to see what it was. I found my mom at the bottom of the basement stairs. I called 911. What time did you start playing Fortnite? Around 2:30. Did you see your mother before you went to your room? She was doing laundry. She was carrying a basket to the basement. Did you talk to her? I said I was going to play games. She said, okay. How did she seem? Happy, sad, angry? Normal. When you heard the crash, what did you think it was? I thought maybe she dropped something. So you went to check? Yes. How long after you heard the crash did you go check? Right away. Immediately. Yes. Raymond leaned forward. Caleb, the paramedics said your mother had been dead for at least 30 to 45 minutes when they arrived. They got there at 3:22. That means she died around 2:35 or 2:40. But you called 911 at 3:15. That's 35 to 40 minutes after she died. If you went to check on her right away, why did you wait so long to call for help? Caleb's expression did not change. I don't know. I was scared. I didn't know what to do. Where were you during those 30 or 40 minutes? I was looking at her. I thought maybe she was just hurt. I didn't know she was dead. But you didn't try to help her. You didn't shake her or call her name. I was scared. You weren't too scared to eventually call 911. I finally thought I should call someone. The video ended. The lights came up. In the courtroom, Caleb sat motionless, his face blank. Linda turned to the jury. The timeline doesn't match, does it, Detective Harris? If Caleb went to check on his mother immediately and she was already dead, why did he wait so long to call for help? The timeline has never made sense, Raymond said, unless he waited deliberately. Objection, Marcus Webb shouted, rising. Speculation. Sustained, Judge Hartwick said. The jury will disregard the detective's last statement. But the seed was planted. Linda smiled. No further questions. Marcus Webb stood for cross-examination, his frustration barely concealed. He had watched the video a dozen times, and every time it troubled him. His client was too composed, too consistent, but he had a job to do. Detective Harris, you've acknowledged that people respond to trauma differently, correct? Yes. And you've also acknowledged that some people freeze when traumatized? Yes. So if Caleb froze, if he stood there in shock for 30 minutes before finally gathering himself enough to call for help, that would explain the timeline, wouldn't it? Raymond met his eyes. If that were true, yes. You don't believe it's true? No, I don't. But you have no evidence that it isn't true, do you? No evidence that Caleb did anything other than what he said. Raymond paused. Not at that time, no. Marcus seized on the phrasing. Not at that time. Do you have evidence now? Linda stood. Objection, Your Honor. Outside the scope of this witness's current testimony, Judge Hartwick nodded. Sustained. Move on, counselor. Marcus gritted his teeth. No further questions. As the day ended, Caleb was led back to the juvenile detention center. In the transport van, he stared out the window at the passing streets. His mind was calm. They had nothing. The detective suspected, but suspicion was not proof. The timeline was odd, but odd was not criminal. He had been careful. He had waited exactly 10 minutes after pushing his mother down the stairs, giving her time to die, giving himself time to compose his story. Then he had waited another 25 minutes, pacing, rehearsing, making sure his voice would sound appropriately shaken when he called 911. He had thought of everything. What he had not thought of was the baby monitor. His mother had installed smart home devices throughout the house 6 months earlier. Security cameras by the doors, motion sensors in the hallways, and a baby monitor in the upstairs hallway left over from when Caleb was an infant. She had never removed it, and when she upgraded to a smart home system, she had connected it to the network. It recorded audio continuously, saving files to a cloud server. Caleb had never noticed it. He had walked right past it after pushing his mother, had stood in the hallway rehearsing his lines, and the monitor had captured every word. Detective Harris knew about the monitor. The technology team was analyzing the audio files now, verifying the timestamps, matching the voice. It would take time, but when it was ready, it would be undeniable. The trial resumed a week later. The courtroom was even more crowded now, the case drawing regional attention. An 11-year-old accused of killing his mother was sensational enough. The whispers that it might be murder made it irresistible. Linda Chen called her next witness, a woman named Dr. Evelyn Park, a forensic psychologist who had evaluated Caleb. Dr. Park was in her 50s, with graying hair and a calm, authoritative presence. She took the stand and was sworn in. Dr. Park, you evaluated Caleb Morgan at the request of the prosecution. What did that evaluation entail? I conducted 3 sessions with Caleb over the course of 2 weeks. Each session was approximately 90 minutes. I used a combination of clinical interviews, standardized psychological tests, and behavioral observation. What were your findings? Dr. Park consulted her notes. Caleb exhibits traits consistent with narcissistic personality disorder and antisocial personality disorder. He demonstrates a lack of empathy, an inflated sense of self-importance, and a tendency to manipulate others to achieve his goals. He shows no genuine remorse for his mother's death and appears primarily concerned with how he is perceived by others. Can you give specific examples? During our sessions, I asked Caleb how he felt about his mother's death. He said he was sad, but his affect, his facial expressions and body language did not match his words. When I asked what he missed most about her, he paused for a long time before giving a generic answer, like he was trying to think of what he should say, rather than expressing genuine feelings. When I asked if he felt responsible in any way, he said no, immediately and without hesitation. Most children, even in accidental deaths, express some guilt, some sense that they wish they had done something differently. Caleb expressed none of that. Did he show concern for anyone other than himself? No. His primary concern throughout our sessions was whether people believed his story. He asked me several times if I thought he was telling the truth. He was very focused on his performance, on managing how he was perceived. Marcus Webb stood. Objection, Your Honor. The witness is characterizing the defendant's natural concern about being falsely accused as performance. That's not a clinical observation, that's an interpretation. Judge Hartwick looked at Dr. Park. Can you clarify? Dr. Park nodded. It's not just that he was concerned about being believed. It's the way he expressed that concern. He didn't ask if I could help him or if I understood what he was going through. He asked if I believed his story, as if his goal was to convince me of a narrative rather than to process his emotions or seek support. That distinction is clinically significant. Objection overruled, Judge Hartwick said. Continue, Dr. Park. I also observed that Caleb's responses changed depending on who was in the room. When it was just the two of us, he was more casual, less emotional. When his attorney was present, he became more subdued, more childlike. That kind of adaptive behavior is common in individuals who are highly manipulative. Linda stepped closer. In your professional opinion, is Caleb Morgan capable of planning and executing a deliberate act of violence? Objection, Marcus shouted. Calls for speculation. Your Honor, Dr. Park is a qualified expert in forensic psychology, Linda countered. She's evaluating the defendant's psychological capacity. I'll allow it, Judge Hartwick said. Answer the question, Dr. Park. Yes, Dr. Park said quietly. In my professional opinion, Caleb Morgan is capable of planning and executing a deliberate act of violence. His psychological profile suggests he has the cognitive ability, the emotional detachment, and the manipulative skills necessary to commit such an act. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Caleb sat perfectly still, his face a mask of hurt confusion, as if wounded by the accusations, but his hands, resting on the table, were relaxed. No tension, no fear. Judge Hartwick noticed. Marcus Webb's cross-examination was aggressive. Dr. Park, you've diagnosed an 11-year-old child with personality disorders typically diagnosed in adults. Isn't that highly unusual? It's uncommon, but not unprecedented. Personality traits manifest in childhood and adolescence. In extreme cases, formal diagnoses can be appropriate. But these diagnoses are controversial, aren't they? Many psychologists believe children's personalities are still developing and that labeling them with adult disorders is premature and potentially harmful. There is debate in the field, yes, but the traits I observed in Caleb are well documented and consistent. Traits you observed over 3 sessions, totaling less than 5 hours. You're making sweeping conclusions about a child's entire psychological makeup based on less than 5 hours of interaction. Dr. Park remained calm. 5 hours of clinical observation, combined with standardized testing and review of collateral information, including school records and interviews with teachers and family members. School records that show a child struggling with the recent divorce of his parents, the death of a family pet, and academic pressure, all of which could explain behavioral changes without diagnosing him as a narcissist or a sociopath. Those stressors are noted in my report. They do not account for the specific patterns I observed. Marcus pressed harder. Dr. Park, you were hired by the prosecution. You know they're trying to prove this child committed murder. Don't you think that might have influenced your evaluation, consciously or unconsciously? No, Dr. Park said firmly. I conducted my evaluation according to professional standards. My findings are based on evidence, not on what the prosecution wants to hear. But you're being paid by the prosecution. I'm being paid for my time and expertise, not for a particular conclusion. Marcus walked back to the defense table. No further questions? As Dr. Park stepped down, Caleb caught her eye and smiled, a small, almost friendly smile. It sent a chill down her spine. The trial continued over the following days. Linda Chen built her case methodically, piece by piece. She called Melissa Morgan's co-workers, who testified that Melissa had seemed anxious in the weeks before her death. mentioning that Caleb had been acting strangely. She called Caleb's school counselor, Janet Mills, a tired woman in her 40s who had met with Caleb several times. "Ms. Mills, why did you meet with Caleb Morgan?" Linda asked. "His teachers reported that he was withdrawn, not participating in class. His grades were dropping. I wanted to check in and see if he needed support." "What did you discuss?" "I asked how things were at home. He said fine. I asked about his parents' divorce. He said it didn't bother him. I asked if he had friends, hobbies, things he enjoyed. He gave short answers, didn't elaborate. He seemed disengaged. Did he ever express anger toward his mother?" Marcus stood. "Objection, leading. Sustained, rephrase." Linda nodded. "Did Caleb express any feelings about his mother?" Janet hesitated. "In our last session, about 2 weeks before Melissa's death, I asked how he was getting along with his mom. He said she was annoying. I asked what he meant, and he said she was always on his case, always nagging him about homework and chores. He said sometimes he wished she would just leave him alone." "Did he say anything else?" "He said it would be easier if she wasn't around." The courtroom went silent. Janet looked at her hands, clearly distressed. "I thought he meant he wished he could live with his dad, or that he wanted space. I didn't think he meant anything violent. If I had thought that, I would have reported it immediately." Linda's voice was gentle. "Of course, you couldn't have known. Did Caleb's demeanor concern you?" "Yes. He was very flat, emotionally. Most kids, when they talk about their parents, show some feeling, even if it's anger or frustration. Caleb was just matter-of-fact, clinical, like he was talking about a problem to be solved." Marcus Webb's cross-examination tried to reframe the testimony. "Ms. Mills, adolescents often say things they don't mean when they're frustrated, correct?" "Yes." "If a child says they wish their parent would leave them alone, that's not a threat. It's a common expression of teenage angst. Caleb is 11, not a teenager. But yes, it could be interpreted that way. And you didn't report it to authorities because you didn't think it was serious." "Correct." "So you, a trained professional, didn't see it as a red flag?" "Not at the time, no." Marcus returned to his seat. Caleb sat beside him, looking small and sad, as if wounded by the implication that he could hurt anyone. The days blurred together, testimony after testimony, each one adding another layer. The medical examiner, Dr. Thomas Ruiz, took the stand and described Melissa Morgan's injuries in clinical detail: severe head trauma, subdural hematoma, cervical spine fracture. The injuries were catastrophic, but Dr. Ruiz noted something significant. "The pattern of injuries is inconsistent with a simple fall downstairs," he said. "There are multiple impact points, suggesting the victim struck the wall and stairs several times with significant force. The cervical fracture, in particular, suggests a violent twisting motion." "Could these injuries occur in an accidental fall?" Linda asked. "It's possible, but unlikely. The severity and pattern suggest the victim was propelled with considerable force, or that the fall was compounded by additional trauma." "Such as being pushed?" "Objection," Marcus said. "Speculation." "Withdrawn," Linda said smoothly. "Dr. Ruiz, in your expert opinion, are these injuries consistent with being pushed down the stairs?" "Yes, they are consistent with that scenario." Marcus Webb's cross-examination focused on the word consistent. "Dr. Ruiz, you said the injuries are consistent with being pushed, but they're also consistent with a fall, correct?" "A violent fall, yes, but a fall nonetheless." "Yes. You cannot say with certainty that Melissa Morgan was pushed? I cannot say with absolute certainty no, but the evidence suggests yes or no, doctor. Can you say with certainty that she was pushed? Dr. Ruiz sighed. No. Thank you. As the trial entered its third week, the defense presented its case. Marcus Webb called character witnesses who described Caleb as a quiet, polite boy. He called a psychologist who disputed Dr. Park's findings, arguing that Caleb's behavior was consistent with trauma, not malice. He called Caleb's father, Derek Morgan, a weary man in his 40s who testified that his son was gentle and kind, incapable of violence. Mr. Morgan, have you ever seen Caleb behave aggressively? Marcus asked. Never. He's a good kid, quiet, keeps to himself. Do you believe he could have intentionally hurt his mother? Derek's voice broke. No, absolutely not. I think he's scared and traumatized, and people are trying to turn a tragedy into something it's not. Linda Chen's cross-examination was brief but pointed. Mr. Morgan, when was the last time you lived with Caleb? 2 years ago, when his mother and I separated. How often do you see him? Every other weekend. When I can. I work a lot. So you see him at most a few days a month? Yes. And you believe that's enough time to truly know who he is, what he's capable of? Derek's face hardened. He's my son. I know him. Do you? Linda let the question hang. No further questions. As the defense rested, Marcus Webb felt a gnawing unease. His client had refused to testify, which was smart given his lack of emotion, but it left the defense case thin. He had poked holes in the prosecution's arguments, created reasonable doubt about whether the death was intentional, but he could see the jury was not convinced. Caleb's demeanor throughout the trial had not helped. The boy was too calm, too controlled. Even when witnesses testified about his mother's death, he showed no grief. Marcus had coached him, begged him to show some emotion, but Caleb had looked at him with cold eyes and said, I'm sad. I just don't show it like other people. Now, as the prosecution prepared for rebuttal, Marcus felt the ground shifting beneath him. Linda Chen had been holding something back. He could see it in her confidence, the way she touched that blue folder on her table. Something was coming. Linda stood and addressed the judge. Your Honor, the state calls a rebuttal witness. We also have a critical piece of evidence that has recently been authenticated and is now ready for admission. Judge Hartwick leaned forward. Proceed. The courtroom doors opened, and a man in his 30s entered. He wore business casual attire and carried a laptop. He was introduced as Michael Brennan, a digital forensics expert. He took the stand and was sworn in. Mr. Brennan, please describe your area of expertise, Linda began. I specialize in digital forensics, specifically the recovery and authentication of audio and video files from smart home devices, computers, and mobile phones. Were you asked to examine evidence in this case? Yes. I was provided with audio files recovered from a smart home baby monitor located in the upstairs hallway of the Morgan residence. The device is a BabyCam Pro, manufactured by Safe Home Technologies. It records continuously and uploads files to a cloud server every 24 hours. What did you find in those files? I found a recording from March 23rd of this year, time-stamped at 2:43 in the afternoon. The recording captures audio from the upstairs hallway. The courtroom was utterly silent. Caleb, for the first time, looked uneasy. His eyes darted to the witness, to his attorney, to the blue folder on Linda's table. What is on that recording? Linda asked. A voice, identified through voice analysis as belonging to Caleb Morgan. The voice is calm and clear. The speaker is rehearsing statements. Can you be more specific? Michael nodded. The voice says, and I quote, "Mom fell down the stairs. I heard a crash. I went to check. She was at the bottom. I called 911. There's a pause. Then the voice says, I was scared. I didn't know what to do. Another pause, then, if I wait 10 minutes, they'll think it was an accident. The courtroom erupted. Gasps, shouts, the scrape of chairs as reporters lunged for their phones. Judge Hartwick struck her gavel repeatedly. Order. Order in this court. Caleb's face had gone white. His hands gripped the edge of the table, knuckles pale. Marcus Webb looked like he had been punched in the stomach. He turned to his client, but Caleb did not meet his eyes. Linda waited for the courtroom to quiet. Mr. Brennan, how do you know this recording is authentic and has not been tampered with? I conducted a full forensic analysis. The file's metadata is intact, showing it was created by the BabyCam Pro device registered to Melissa Morgan's account. The timestamp is embedded in the file and matches the device's internal clock, which is synchronized with network time servers. I also analyzed the audio waveform for signs of editing or splicing. There are none. The recording is continuous and unaltered. How certain are you that the voice is Caleb Morgan's? I compared the recording to known samples of Caleb's voice, including the 911 call he made and the police interview recordings. I used voice biometric analysis software that measures pitch, tone, cadence, and speech patterns. The match is consistent across all parameters. I am certain, within the limits of forensic science, that the voice on the recording is Caleb Morgan's. Linda walked to the evidence table and picked up a small digital recorder connected to portable speakers. Your Honor, I would like to enter State's Exhibit 12, the audio recording recovered from the smart home monitor, and play it for the court. Judge Hartwick nodded slowly. So entered. Proceed. The lights dimmed slightly. The courtroom was so quiet that the hum of the ventilation system seemed loud. Linda pressed play. At first, there was only the faint ambient noise of a house, the distant sound of a refrigerator running, the creak of settling wood. Then footsteps, soft, on carpet, a door closing, then silence, then Caleb's voice, unmistakable, clear and calm. Mom fell down the stairs. I heard a crash. I went to check. She was at the bottom. I called 911. A pause, the sound of breathing. I was scared. I didn't know what to do. Another pause, longer this time, then quieter, almost to himself. If I wait 10 minutes, they'll think it was an accident. Silence, footsteps moving away. Linda let the recording play for another 30 seconds, the silence more damning than any words. Then she stopped it. The courtroom was frozen. In the gallery, Melissa Morgan's mother pressed her hands to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. The jurors stared at Caleb, their expressions ranging from shock to disgust. Judge Hartwick's face was carved from stone. Caleb sat motionless. His face was still pale, but his eyes were fixed on the table. His breathing was shallow. The mask had shattered. Marcus Webb stood shakily. Your Honor, I need a recess to consult with my client. Denied, Judge Hartwick said coldly. Cross-examine the witness, counselor, or sit down. Marcus looked at Michael Brennan, then at the recorder, then at his client. There was nothing to cross-examine. The evidence was irrefutable. He sank back into his chair. No questions, Your Honor. Linda turned to the jury. The defense has argued that Melissa Morgan's death was a tragic accident, that Caleb was a scared, confused child who didn't know what to do. But this recording, made just minutes after he pushed his mother down the stairs, proves otherwise. It proves he knew exactly what he was doing. It proves he planned his story. It proves he waited deliberately, giving his mother time to die so that when he finally called for help, it would look like an accident. This was not reckless endangerment. This was premeditated murder. She let the words settle, then returned to her seat. The blue folder lay open in front of her, its purpose fulfilled. Judge Hartwick looked at Caleb. "Mr. Morgan, do you have anything to say?" Caleb slowly raised his head. His eyes met the judge's. For a moment, the courtroom saw the real Caleb, the cold, calculating child who had believed he was smarter than everyone else. Then he looked down again and whispered, "No, Your Honor." "Very well. We will adjourn for the day. Closing arguments will begin tomorrow." As the guards led Caleb away, he walked like a sleepwalker, his performance finally over. The courtroom emptied slowly, spectators and reporters whispering, the weight of what they had heard pressing down on them. Linda Chen gathered her files. David Park appeared at her side. "That was devastating." "It was the truth," Linda said quietly. "And the truth always is." The next day, closing arguments began. Marcus Webb stood before the jury, his face drawn. He did his best, arguing that even the recording could be interpreted in ways that did not prove murder, that Caleb's words could reflect a panicked child trying to make sense of what happened. But his heart was not in it, and the jury could tell. He sat down after 20 minutes, looking defeated. Linda Chen's closing argument was a symphony of evidence and emotion. She walked the jury through every piece of testimony, every forensic finding, every inconsistency in Caleb's story. And then she returned to the recording. "You heard his voice," she said. "You heard the calm, the calculation, the deliberate planning. If I wait 10 minutes, they'll think it was an accident. Those are not the words of a scared child. Those are the words of a killer covering his tracks." Caleb Morgan pushed his mother down those stairs. He waited for her to die. He rehearsed his story. He called 911 only when he was sure she was dead and his performance was ready. And then he sat in this courtroom for weeks, performing grief, performing confusion, believing that his age would protect him. But the evidence does not lie. The recording does not lie. Caleb Morgan is guilty of premeditated murder, and it is your duty to hold him accountable. She sat down. The jury was dismissed to deliberate. It took them 3 hours. When they returned, the 4 persons stood. "We find the defendant, Caleb Morgan, guilty of premeditated murder." The courtroom erupted again. Melissa's mother sobbed openly. Caleb sat perfectly still, staring straight ahead, his face blank. Judge Hartwick set a sentencing hearing for 1 week later. That week felt like an eternity. Caleb was held in isolation at the Juvenile Detention Center, no longer among the general population. He spent his days lying on a narrow cot, staring at the ceiling. The performance was over. There was no audience left to manipulate. For the first time in his life, he felt something close to fear. The sentencing hearing was held in the same courtroom, now packed beyond capacity. Melissa Morgan's family was given the opportunity to deliver victim impact statements. Her mother, Susan Whitley, took the stand first. She was a small woman, aged by grief, her hands shaking as she held a photograph of her daughter. "Melissa was my only child," she said, her voice breaking. "She was kind and loving, and she tried so hard to be a good mother. She worked 2 jobs to provide for Caleb after the divorce. She went without so he could have what he needed. And he killed her. He looked her in the eye, and he pushed her down those stairs, and he let her die alone and afraid. And then he lied about it. He sat in this courtroom and lied and pretended to be a victim. My daughter is gone. I will never see her again. And the person who took her from me is sitting right there, and he feels nothing." Susan looked directly at Caleb. "You are not a child. You are a monster, and I hope you spend the rest of your life in a cell, knowing what you did." She stepped down, sobbing. Melissa's best friend spoke next, then Melissa's co-worker. Each statement was a dagger, each one stripping away another piece of Caleb's carefully constructed facade. Finally, it was time for sentencing. Judge Hartwick looked at Caleb, and her expression was one of cold, focused anger. "Caleb Morgan, stand." Caleb stood, flanked by guards. He looked impossibly small in his orange jumpsuit. Judge Hartwick began. "I have been a judge for over 20 years. I have presided over hundreds of cases involving children. I have seen children who made terrible mistakes, children who acted impulsively, children who were victims of circumstance. I have always believed that children deserve compassion, that they deserve a chance to learn and grow and change. But this case has tested that belief." She paused, her eyes locked on Caleb. "You are 11 years old. By all rights, you should be in school, playing with friends, worrying about homework and video games. Instead, you stand before me convicted of murdering your own mother, not in a fit of rage, not in a moment of impulse, but with premeditation, with planning, with a cold, calculated awareness of exactly what you were doing." Her voice grew harder. "Throughout this trial, you have performed. You have acted the part of a scared, confused child. You have manipulated everyone around you, or tried to. You believed that your age would protect you, that people would see a little boy and refuse to believe you were capable of murder. You underestimated this court. You underestimated the evidence, and you underestimated the moral weight of what you did." She leaned forward. The recording played in this courtroom was one of the most chilling pieces of evidence I have ever heard. Your voice, calm and clear, rehearsing your lies, your words. "If I wait 10 minutes, they'll think it was an accident. Prove beyond any doubt that you knew exactly what you were doing. You pushed your mother down those stairs. You watched her die. You waited. Not because you were scared, but because you wanted to make sure your story would be believed. You treated her death like a problem to be managed, a performance to be perfected." Judge Hartwick's voice dropped to a near whisper, forcing the courtroom to strain to hear. "Your mother loved you. She worked herself to exhaustion to provide for you. She worried about you. She tried to help you. And you killed her. You ended her life because she was inconvenient to you, because you wanted her gone. That is not the act of a child. That is the act of someone who lacks the most fundamental human quality, empathy." She straightened. "I have read Dr. Park's evaluation. I have read the school reports, the interviews, the statements from everyone who knew you. The picture that emerges is of a deeply disturbed individual who has learned to mimic emotion without feeling it, who manipulates others without conscience, who sees people as obstacles or tools. You are dangerous, Caleb Morgan, and you will continue to be dangerous. Her voice rose, filling the courtroom. You believed you were untouchable. You believed you were smarter than the detectives, the prosecutors, the judge, the jury. You believed that your performance would save you. But justice is not a performance. Justice is not fooled by crocodile tears and practiced innocence. Justice sees the truth. And the truth is that you are a murderer. She paused, letting the word hang in the air. This court has a responsibility to protect society. It also has a responsibility to hold individuals accountable for their actions, regardless of age. You took a life. You took your mother's life, and you did so with full knowledge and intent. The law allows me to sentence you as a juvenile with the possibility of rehabilitation and eventual release. But I do not believe you can be rehabilitated. I do not believe you feel remorse. I do not believe you understand the magnitude of what you have done. And I will not risk releasing you into society where you could harm others. Judge Hartwick's voice was steel. Caleb Morgan, I hereby sentence you to life imprisonment in a juvenile correctional facility to be transferred to an adult facility upon your 18th birthday. You will serve this sentence without the possibility of parole. You will have the opportunity to reflect on what you have done. You will have access to education, to counseling, to programs designed to help you. But you will not be free. You will never be free. Because the life you took cannot be returned, and the trust you violated cannot be restored. She struck her gavel. This court is adjourned. Caleb stood motionless as the words washed over him. Life imprisonment. No parole. He had believed until the very end that something would save him, that his age, his performance, some technicality would set him free. But it was over. He turned as the guards took his arms, and for the first time his face crumpled. Not with remorse, but with the realization that he had lost. The performance had failed. The audience had seen through him, and now there was nothing left but the truth. As he was led from the courtroom, he passed his grandmother. She looked at him with a mixture of grief and something else, something harder. She did not speak. She simply watched as he was taken away. The courtroom emptied slowly. Melissa's family embraced, sobbing, not with joy but with exhausted relief. Linda Chen shook hands with Detective Harris, both of them quiet, the weight of the case settling on their shoulders. Marcus Webb gathered his files without a word and left through the side door, his face gray. In the days that followed, the case dominated the news. The audio recording was played on every station, analyzed by experts, debated by commentators. Some argued that an 11-year-old could not truly understand the consequences of his actions, that life imprisonment was too harsh. Others argued that the recording proved Caleb understood exactly what he was doing, that mercy would be misplaced. Ravenwood County struggled to process what had happened. Neighbors who had known the Morgans spoke of their shock, their disbelief. Teachers at Caleb's school underwent training on recognizing warning signs in students. The case became a catalyst for conversations about childhood development, mental health, and the capacity for evil. Caleb Morgan was transferred to a high-security juvenile facility 3 hours away. He was placed in a single cell, monitored constantly. Counselors attempted to work with him, but he remained cold, detached. He went through the motions, attending classes, participating in programs, but those who worked with him saw no genuine change. He was biding his time, still performing, though the audience was gone. Susan Whitley visited her daughter's grave every week. She brought flowers, sat on the grass, and talked to Melissa as if she was still there. She told her about the trial, about the verdict, about the sentencing. She cried until she had no tears left, and slowly, painfully, she began to rebuild her life. Detective Raymond Harris retired 6 months after the trial. The case had taken something from him, a piece of faith in humanity that he could not recover. He spent his retirement volunteering with at-risk youth, trying to identify and help children before they reached the point of no return. Linda Chen continued her work as a prosecutor. The Morgan case became a defining moment in her career, but she rarely spoke of it. When asked, she would say only that the evidence spoke for itself and that justice had been served. Marcus Webb took fewer cases after the Morgan trial. He had always believed in defending the accused, in ensuring everyone had a fair trial. But the recording haunted him. The sound of that calm, calculating voice rehearsing lies. He wondered if he had ever truly known his client at all. Years passed. Caleb Morgan turned 12, then 13, then 14. He grew taller, his features sharpening as adolescence took hold. He remained in custody, his life measured in routines and restrictions. He never spoke of his mother. He never expressed remorse. When asked by counselors if he understood why he was there, he would say yes, he had been convicted of a crime. But he never acknowledged guilt. He never said the words, "I killed her." The empty chair where he had sat during the trial remained in the courtroom, used by other defendants in other cases. But those who had been present for the Morgan trial never forgot. They remembered the small boy in the orange jumpsuit and white undershirt, performing innocence with practiced ease. They remembered the moment the recording played, the gasps, the silence. They remembered the judge's condemnation, the cold fury in her voice as she sentenced him to life. And they remembered the lesson, that evil does not always announce itself with horns and fangs. Sometimes it wears the face of a child. Sometimes it hides behind tears and confusion. Sometimes it believes it is untouchable. But justice, true justice, sees beyond the performance. It listens to the evidence. It weighs the truth. And when the mask finally falls, it does not flinch. It does not look away. It holds the guilty accountable, no matter their age, no matter their excuses. Caleb Morgan learned that lesson too late. He had believed his youth would protect him. He had believed he was smarter than the system. He had believed he could perform his way to freedom. But the baby monitor in the hallway, a device he never noticed, had captured the truth. And the truth, spoken in his own voice, had destroyed him. In the end, the courtroom had been a stage. But it had not been his stage. It had been justice's stage, and justice had delivered a performance of its own, one that would echo in Ravenwood County for years to come. The performance of accountability, the performance of truth, the performance of a system that, when faced with the unthinkable, did not blink. It saw, it heard, it judged, and it acted. Caleb Morgan would spend the rest of his life behind bars, a consequence of the choice he made on a March afternoon when he pushed his mother down the stairs and waited, calmly, for her to die. He had believed he was untouchable. He had been wrong, and the recording, that single piece of undeniable evidence, had proven it beyond all doubt. The case file was closed, the evidence sealed, the verdict final. And in the quiet moments, when the courtroom was empty and the lights were dim, you could almost hear the echo of that recording, playing over and over. A child's voice, calm and cold, rehearsing lies. And then those final damning words. If I wait 10 minutes, they'll think it was an accident. But they did not think it was an accident. They knew the truth, and the truth had set no one free. It had only locked the door and thrown away the key.